Welcome back everyone, I'm your host Tony and this is Hard4Games. Back in 2020, the Nintendo Giga Leak occurred. It was a massive tidal wave of information that suddenly hit the internet. Source code, assets, and even early game builds all suddenly became publicly viewable. This data spanned across multiple console generations as well, like the SNES, the N64, Game Boy, even more modern systems like the Wii U, and I say modern because we all know that the Wii U wasn't even modern when it launched. Here on Hard4Games, we mostly covered the Zelda 64 content, and I say Zelda 64 because that was its name before it was called Ocarina of Time. For example, there were early maps discovered of both Kokiri Village and the FST Dan dungeon, which was assumed to be, based on its name and how early it was, the first dungeon built out for the then fledgling Zelda 64. You can actually see this dungeon featured very prominently in early screenshots. Also found were very early enemy models, animations, and textures, which allowed modders like Z64Me to sort of take what was found, apply their retail counterparts AI, kind of like the brain, and sort of combine those assets together to reanimate, to Frankenstein these old enemies back to life. Now, in the modding scene, it was very popular to rebuild these old dungeons and early enemies. However, there was another set of maps that barely got any attention whatsoever. These were Zelda Ocarina of Time maps specifically for use with the Nintendo 64 disk drive, i.e. the long-lost Ura Zelda. Now, the maps in question are miniature dungeons in various states of completion, or realistically, incompletion. A few rooms, chests, items, enemies, and a boss. About a year ago, I commissioned a modder named Zell to put these maps together in a playable state. In his ROM menu, he labels them per dungeon and if they are, quote, incomplete. Incomplete in this case means there were no enemies, items, chests, etc. The only thing that existed in the files was just the layout of the area. And as you'll soon see from the footage, when I play an incomplete dungeon, I can't always really progress to the boss because there's no items, there's no boss key for Link to get, there are no chests, etc. Now, initially the thought process on these maps were that they were Nintendo developers attempting to build out a boss rush mode for Ura Zelda, which would make sense, because after all, the 3DS remake had one, and that could have very well have been a leftover idea from the original Ura Zelda expansion. However, that may not be the case. Let's go ahead and watch the footage, we'll talk again at the end, and I'll periodically chime in while I'm playing the game here. Alright, so here's your first clue as to what these areas might be. Most of them include a compass and a map item, which is a bit odd considering the structure and brevity of the environment.
Listen!
So here's our first example of an incomplete dungeon, and as you'll see, there's nothing really here that allows me to progress. Here I try to land in a different area, no luck though. Here's another example of an incomplete dungeon. Nothing much to do here, as you'll soon see, but still fun to explore. Now, the Spirit Temple is interesting because it's sort of an example of one of the longer areas, if only due to the number of and difficulty of the enemies you have to deal with. Bottom of the Well is a little bit different because it's not incomplete, but there's nothing really to do here, and there's no boss? Not that I can tell. Here we have the Shadow Temple, which is another example of a longer area. There's lots to do here, at least as far as a tiny dungeon is concerned. So a lot of what you've seen here today has been pretty random. Like, the areas seem kind of random. Some of the chest placement seems a little random. Items seem a little unnecessary or possibly random, like getting the map and compass for a 2-room dungeon. And there are also examples of longer mini dungeons. You don't have the 1-2 boom boss, it's multiple rooms, multiple enemies, etc. It would kind of take the rush out of the boss rush mode. Normally when you have a boss rush, it's boom, boom, boom. You're like hitting boss after boss, or like very little traversal in between. Here you don't have that. So what is this? Well, in my heart, I'd love it to be a boss rush mode, but realistically, logically, it just can't be. It's not. It's a test area. They're test maps. Is it for Ura Zelda? Yes, absolutely. But these are tests to make sure the cartridge to disc connectivity, i.e. the 64DD hooks, are functioning. The ability to swap one thing for another, in this case one dungeon or area for another dungeon/area. They just needed smaller places and dungeons to test, and then they could expand in the future if they wanted to. They didn't need to be pretty, they just needed to function on real hardware. Now, despite it not being a boss rush area, I do think it's fascinating to finally be able to dive into these and experience them. Again, they didn't receive a lot of attention when the Giga Leak occurred, but I think that was primarily for 2 reasons. One, probably it took a little bit more to implement, and 2, like, I think it wasn't quite as like flashy as like a brand new dungeon or like a new alpha enemy or something to that effect. You know, like, as far as I'm aware, no one had actually fully put all of these together. I had to like pay someone to be willing to do it because no one like really wanted to, just of their own volition, which is fine. But I definitely wanted to be able to kind of see and showcase these. So hope you all enjoyed. And that'll be it for today. I wanted to thank you all for watching, and if you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff, and I hope to see you all back next time. Take care.